Dodge County, Nebraska, which includes the city of Scribner. My name is Keith Carl. I'm with Hannah Keel and Associates. We're a community planning and research consulting firm based out of Lincoln. We've had the good fortune of working in Dodge County prior to this experience. In 2017, we put together a countywide housing study for Dodge County on behalf of Greater Fremont Development Council. And this opportunity is, basically an update to that housing study, as well as some new components relating to the flooding incidents that happened back in 2019. We're taking a look at a lot of different components as it relates to housing, and hopefully to having a final study prepared here, I'd say in about the next month and a half or so. We got some other components we're going to take a look at, namely with those cities that were affected by the flooding. This is a housing study process that was partially funded by the Nebraska Investment Finance Authority and as well as the Greater Fremont Development Council. Took part in putting together a housing study grant for NIFA and received a 49% match grant to make the study a reality for the community and for the county. So we have a lot of good information that we're currently going through right now for Scribner. And I'm not gonna present a whole bunch of that tonight, but I can kind of talk about some of it. We've had a couple of survey processes going on as well, mostly taking a look at housing stakeholders as well as major employers throughout the county. Kind of what their situations are with providing affordable housing or providing housing opportunity for local employees. And so we've done a pretty extensive process of that, as well as a lot of data collection from the U.S. Census, the American Community Survey, as well as local data. And kind of what the purpose of tonight is to get an understanding from you folks, kind of what's going on in Scribner, sort of what you've done as it relates to housing development or housing rehabilitation, a little bit more on maybe kind of what your vision is, or what housing types do you feel are the greatest need, or what population is in the greatest need of housing in your community. And, we'll take that documentation and put it into the final study. I can answer any questions that you might have in regards to that process. One of the things I do want to mention too, in the information that we have put together, Scribner is basically experiencing a stable population. There might be some population declines. There have been since the 2010 census, but the important thing to remember is that the population is remaining pretty stable in your community. And so we always say that that's a pretty good base. That's always a good base for a community to have at least a stable population, that they can begin to get more aggressive with housing development and being able to plan for the development of housing over the next 5 years, 10 years, and beyond. In an effort to reverse the trend of a declining population. And one of the things I want to bring up real quick too, we have crunched some numbers as it relates to housing target demand, what the target demand is for the community, based upon population increases, based upon alleviating certain housing issues, such as cost burden households, those spending 30% or more of their monthly income on housing costs. People living in bad housing, people living in housing that's deteriorating or dilapidated, finding new housing opportunities for them. Also creating the ability for housing choice in your community. For people that are moving in from another community or need a different living situation in Scribner, having a variety of housing options available. What's it going to take to make that a reality in your community? And so for Scribner, as of right now, we're taking a look at probably a target demand for 24 housing units over the next 5 years. I have right now 14 owner and 10 rental housing units is kind of what we're looking at on a preliminary basis for housing demand within your community. Now, a lot of that comes down to finding available land in the community, having available financial resources to be able to do that. But again, those numbers aren't necessarily set in stone for what the community definitely needs, but it's to give you a scenario that if you're looking to alleviate certain housing issues in your community, that's the amount of housing units it's going to take to be able to do that. So again, 24 housing units is kind of what we're projecting right now. We've had a couple of meetings with a localized housing task force and a housing steering committee through Greater Fremont Development Council that have kind of helped us refine some of our numbers, and we've had some pretty good representation from Scribner. So that's just kind of some of the information that I wanted to cover with you real quick. I want to mostly hear about your comments. What do you feel is needed in the community? Where are the shortfalls as it relates to housing? What population group or what price product or price range needs to be targeted in your community? And so I want to open it up to you folks for some comments and answer any questions or comments that you might have.
I would say since 2 years before the 2019 flood, we had approximately 35 houses for sale. Now we're down to 2. So the 2019 has really put the crunch on every lower priced home there is in the area. I would say homeowners are looking for, it's either first time buyers or whatever, and they're looking at costs, probably 100,000 on down is the hot market. As fast as they go up for sale, they're getting snagged. And I don't think we can really build much for housing at that price, new.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is a significant issue. You know, the price of materials is going up, the cost of labor is going up, everything is increasing in price, and it becomes more and more difficult for communities all across the state of Nebraska and all across the Midwest to build housing in that price range. In some communities, it's virtually impossible just because of competition and because of demand. But you know, there are multiple programs that communities have utilized to be able to buy down the cost of housing or the cost of housing development. We've seen free lot programs. We've seen you know, areas that are considered designated blight and substandard, you know, TIF areas that have assisted in buying down the cost of housing. We've also seen a lot of purchase, rehab, resale, or re-rent activities with an entity acting as, you know, as like a house flipper sort of. And you know, it comes down to communities and local organizations getting creative with the dollars that they have, as well as with the dollars that are available. We can all agree, I think there's more buckets of money available for housing now than there were even 5 years ago. That, you know, communities of your size just don't even know exist. And that's kind of the purpose of the housing study is you know, finding those creative methods to putting a more affordable housing product or a more affordable housing situation in your community. One quick question, you did mention 35 houses were for sale pre-flood. How many are for sale today, would you think?
1.
2, okay. 1 or 2?
One.
Just 1, okay.
Pretty hot temps on that.
I'm sure.
Have there been a lot of prospective buyers for that house, a lot of interest for it, or not much?
It just went up not too long ago.
Yeah, it's only been on the market for probably a week and a half, which honestly is a pretty long time considering.
The house behind me went up in like, what, your grandparents' house?
Yeah.
Grace bought it in like a week and a half, 2 weeks, and then her house sold in like 3 days.
Yeah.
Houses
So,
don't last long here.
I guess just give you a little perspective on my end of where I come from. I've been doing some, I guess, call it flipping the houses in town. I've done 10 in the area, 9 in town, probably over the last 2 years, 2.5 years, somewhere in that range. The 9 that I've done in town, I sat on 1 for probably 4 months, and the rest of them have sold within a week.
Wow, that's a pretty hot market.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I mean, that, and the plus side of that, or the silver lining of that, is you have people that are interested in either moving to your community or remaining in the community and finding a better living situation. So, you know, Scribner has a pretty healthy market, it sounds like. It's just a matter of getting more housing in the ground, you know, that acts as kind of, I don't want to say spec housing, but, is a vacant housing unit that gives the community the ability to provide housing choice for prospective buyers. One of the things I do want to point out real quick, I'm taking a look at some of our preliminary data, housing vacancy in your community, just taking a look at housing that is, for sale or for rent, or, for sale by owner, or rented or sold but currently not occupied, basically anything that's marketable. Let's see, Scribner, we had a vacancy rate right now, we're projecting at about 2.6%. We think a pretty healthy vacancy rate for a community should be about 6, maybe even 7%. And right now, some of the preliminary information that we're showing has a vacancy rate of 2.6%. So, there is that housing shortage in your community, and it's going to be up to local organizations, such as those that Gary and Kelly are involved with, to funnel money into your community and to get those programs rolling that can create new housing opportunity. Gary, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about kind of what your program does, or if it's done anything in Scribner, or kind of what kind of resources you have available to assist the community.
Yeah, sure. I think, Scribner, and those of you in the room probably already know about the Workforce Housing Fund that we partnered on as a county. And so that money has been establishment of revolving dollars. And what I was telling the Fremont folks is that $2 million or $2 million plus, Kelly, that we have, it currently revolves based on the projects that we've done. But in a short time, in the next few years, that money will not technically have any strings tied to the state. And then that time span, then we can, as an organization, as a group, as a Dodge County investment group, be more creative with how we use those dollars to assist everyone. So I'm excited about that potential with that fund. But there is also the opportunity for us to expand the amount of money that we use in Scribner and Dodge County by being creative with the land bank opportunity that's coming up, that's now available. If you all are able to partner with the rest of the county communities to develop that land bank opportunity, those buildings or homes that aren't really doing much from the tax rolls, if you can get access to that and flip those and turn them around, I think that's another tool in the toolbox, so to speak. And then finally, I think what Kelly and I have talked about is maybe there's other small programs from the fund that we can use. So first-time home buyer assistance, maybe rehab assistance, some of those things that we can use some of the dollars we have to generate some efforts. And we already have a builder here that could potentially tap right into that, would be one of our first Scribner projects. So fingers are crossed that goes forward. And I really think we need you all at the table, and keep that, sorry to be long here, but I think the hope I have is that we can collaborate even more and make this more of a partnership with economic development. So right now, the combination of housing, we never talk about projects too, and how those all match together. As soon as we got the Costco project, boom, there's all of this housing need, right? Because now you have workforce. I think what Keith can do with this study is actually tie those things together. And we talked about placemaking, which is tied to what NIFA asked everyone to do when they do a housing study, is to tie it all together. I'll let Keith tell you what that means to him. But I think placemaking is one thing, attaching and connecting the workforce, potential recruitment of small companies or large, what have you, and tying it all together with your comprehensive plan and everything else. And so I just want to make sure that we know that they're woven together, and we want to be partners. So our next meeting that we're hoping to have is kind of a larger conversation with your community leaders who want to be on that call, other community leaders in Dodge County and maybe even Cedar Bluffs, to have a conversation as to how we can work together to build up this area. So, sorry, Keith, just wanted to get it all out of the way.
Nope, that's fine. Take all the time you need. I mean, you know this community like the back of your hand, I'm sure. But Gary's absolutely right. It's all about placemaking. It's all about identity of community. It's all about community resiliency. The floods wiped out quite a bit, and from what we've seen from communities along the Platte River, along the Elkhorn River, and in your area, is that they've all rebuilt, or they've all done their part to maintain their sense of identity as a community. And housing is just one of the big components to placemaking, as Gary mentioned. Nebraska Investment Finance Authority likes to use the term place-based development to ensure that new housing projects are harmonious in nature with their surroundings, in terms of consistent design within the community, so that it matches adjacent buildings. It's a visitable development, it's a sustainable development, and different components like that. And that's one of the things we'll talk about in the housing study, is how new developments can be sustainable and can be resilient in the community. We also want to target different population groups. I guess to you folks, is there a segment of the population that is having the hardest time obtaining housing? Is it first-time home buyers? Is it the local workforce? Is it senior or elderly populations? What do you folks think about unmet need in your community?
I personally believe it's all of it. You need elderly are looking for places, first-time home buyers are looking for places. People are looking for their second home.
We're located between two bigger cities. Well, West Point's bigger than us.
Yeah, and there is some benefit to that. You're pretty close to a couple of major employment centers in West Point and in Fremont. And how well can you attract those employees, or even those major employers, to invest in your community? That's one of the things that Fremont and ultimately West Point, although it's in Cumming County, those are just two towns in your area that have done a very good job with making major employers be a part of their community, by bringing in new housing opportunities, or assisting people to live closer to their place of employment. And I think if Scribner can capture some of those people traveling to West Point, or some of those people even living in West Point, and saying we have a better alternative down here, it's a great marketing tool. And that's one of the things the housing study will be as well for the community, is a marketing tool. Couple more comments. And anything else in regards to unmet need or housing situations in your community, unmet populations, housing rehab? Is there a big rehabilitation need in your community? What are some of your thoughts on that?
I think we see a lot of our older people leaving the farms, and they are looking for something smaller in town. I think a lot of the houses were bought up by them, but a lot of them went to Fremont. We don't have townhomes to offer that have zero level entry, that are easy to use. I think they're looking to downsize, and they're looking to not have all of that care that they had to give at the farm. They don't want to mow, they don't want to have to do a lot of caretaking, but they still want a nice place. And I think we see more of that. And I know that, being the librarian, we've lost some of our library people to Fremont because there was nowhere here for them to buy.
Yeah, and that's a tough sell for a small community, especially when Fremont is nearby. And we see that in small communities as well, that retiring farmer population that quite frankly, they want to remain as independent as possible for as long as possible, but farming obviously is a much bigger challenge. So can the community partner with a local developer or a local funding agency to get some maintenance-free housing in the ground, be it a townhouse project or a duplex project or some sort of independent living for seniors, that makes the community more attractive to that elderly population. And that's something that's not out of the realms, especially for Scribner, because there are a lot of rural communities that are experiencing that same thing, that retiring farmer population wanting to move to a community, one that they specifically identify with. Yeah, I completely agree with that comment. What are your folks' thoughts on, oh, go ahead.
Being here at the city office and everything, when there's any requests for housing, mostly for rental, it'd be for probably married couples with younger kids and everything. Almost 95% of it is for houses, not apartments, 2 to 3 bedroom houses and the availability. And most of them are out here because our rent is so much cheaper than Fremont's and everything else. And to get those built at an affordable price is just going to be hard.
Mm-hmm. How much vacant land do you have in the community that right now is designated for residential development? Is there a whole lot, or are you looking for areas,
We have
growth areas
a
outside?
couple spots that can be annexed outside. We've got opened up with infrastructure. We probably opened up 5 lots on the east side with another 2 blocks of sewer line. We could probably add another 6 lots. We opened up Railroad Place, which is 6 to 8 lots. We've got the 275 bypass that will be let out for bids this fall or winter, which will develop out to the southeast of town, possibility of lots. And then plus straight west of town, we have the ability to do some. And there's ground going up for sale north inside our levee where that could possibly be developed into more lots.
Okay, very good, very good. So for vacant lot development, has there been any interest in, outside developers? Have you used a lot of local contractors for that? What do you folks typically do for developing housing?
Probably the worst thing for vacant lot housing that's in or where all the infrastructure is we're still based on 60-foot lots.
Mm-hmm.
And people they want 120-foot lots. And that kind of restricts what type of house you can put on. And using an alley compared to a paved street in front, it limits some of the openings there. But we have a lot of vacant lots that are Scribner Housing, Residential Housing Committee or whatever. When they went through, they did some demolition of houses that were really run down. We have a lot of lots. It's just getting people that can afford that much money to build new. And right now, with COVID and everything, there's a little apprehension yet with house builders taking a chance or really going out on the edge.
Right. And, the 60-foot lot, or the 60-foot lot issue is prevalent for most small towns as well. Some of them even dealing with 50-foot lots. That's always challenging to develop on, but we tell communities there are housing opportunities available, for narrow lot developments. I always bring up tiny homes. I know that's not the most popular term, but it is a housing type that can go on that 60-foot lot. It might not be wildly popular, but it is something that provides an opportunity for housing in your community. It gives you a housing structure that pays its way on the tax roll a lot better than a dilapidated house or a undeveloped lot would. And some smaller communities are kind of sort of coming around to that. It's still obviously just kind of the interest of, is this really going to sell in my community? But we're seeing more smaller communities kind of take that risk and see if, maybe 2 or 3 houses on a narrow lot are something that could be marketable in the future. But having said that too, I agree with you also that everybody wants that 120-foot lot, and that's just what's more desirable. But at the same time, you got to be thinking about what's available in the core of your community, and that's where those more narrow lots are. And it's important to develop housing solutions that can fill those lots as part of an infill project.
The one thing I hear about in conversations with people talking around is with the existing lots that are within town. If someone's going to spend $225,000, $300,000 on a house, they want to be with houses that are just the same as they are. They don't want to be next to an $80,000 house or a $120,000 house. They want to be with the same as them, So that's the problem I see with the lots in town. Just my thought on them.
Sure. And I agree with that too. That's definitely the case in a lot of communities. And that goes back to when I talked about, place-based development and consistent development within your community. Because you're obviously not going to get that $300,000 house, like you said, next to an $80,000 house. That's, that's just something that doesn't happen. But it comes down to being creative with different housing types and what you can put in the ground to satisfy a need for a family that just needs a different living situation. Gary's kind of talked about this too, is the I think it was LB 886, the land bank program. That is something that could potentially assist in helping to market the vacant lots that are available in your community, be it a narrow lot or be it a newly developed subdivision or newly platted subdivision, I should say. Communities and counties other than Omaha would be able to take advantage of establishing a land bank program so that you have your own personal inventory of lots that you can market to local development corporations or private developers in an effort to get housing put in the ground. And Gary, I didn't know if you had any additional comments on that or kind of how your organization's going to move forward on that. But if you have any comments on that, I'd appreciate that.
Sure, Keith. I think it's a new opportunity for communities of your size and even Fremont to actually collaborate on how to access those properties in your communities. And what I've heard is that it'll be Northeast Economic Development District or someone like GFDC, not likely us, but most likely the district, that would be kind of the contractor to move forward. And first, you're going to find all these lots that you feel need to be flipped over or turned over. And then what you could do is actually check with the Omaha Land Bank. If you just Google that and go to the Omaha Land Bank, you'll see that what they've done with properties that were once not on the tax rolls or had some issues, being able to get access to those, own them, and then sell them in the hands of someone who's an active owner to build and develop. And I think now that you have the opportunity to do it, it's going to take some time to develop because you're talking about collaborating with a region of people to make it conducive for you guys to access those lots, have the money to acquire them, and then do what you have to do to get them up to what you think the standard is for lots, and then sell them. And what you'll see on that database is just a list of how they've done it in Omaha. And yours is going to be different because it's going to be a smaller scale. But this is a tremendous opportunity that none of the smaller communities in the state have had, other than, as Keith said, Douglas County, and I think, was it Lincoln, Keith? Does Lincoln have access to that? Or Sarpy County, I think.
Yeah, Sarpy County.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sarpy. Keith, can you speak to what the opportunities might be for Scribner, I guess, in the respect of trying to consider the diversity of housing? You started to talk about you can use some of these smaller non-conforming lots for different uses of housing. And I think when you mentioned tiny homes, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but it's kind of become a big thing in the rest of the country. And I think what I found, and Keith, you can speak to this hopefully, that they've been able to beautify these things in communities, build them up to make them look like regular housing, but obviously with a smaller footprint. That gives you leverage so that if someone in your community wants to be here and it's a young person who just doesn't want to live in a bigger place, but they also want to live in Scribner, you don't want to turn away anyone who is from here or who is potentially gainfully employed. You always want to have an option. I think, Keith, if you can speak to why that would help benefit the vacancy rate of people.
Right. And one of the things, to back up what Gary's saying is it's all about partnerships. The bigger the circle of partnerships you have, the more buckets of money you can tap into for housing development or rehabilitation or replacement activities. We see a number of different communities getting creative with how they provide housing. Schuyler, for example, they the school district up there is very active in developing housing that acts as a transitional living situation for new teachers until they can find a more permanent living situation in the community. You see towns like Fairbury, Nebraska, that are very, very active in housing demolition and replacement. The previous city administrator that was there made it kind of his personal project to demolish 10 dilapidated homes a year. And through, I think, about 5 years, he had about 40 of them demolished. Of course, he's left over with a vacant lot at that point, but that lot then becomes something that he can market to a local developer and say, we have this land available for a townhouse project or a multifamily housing project, because it's all because of land availability and being able to bolster the housing stock and put something that contributes on the tax roll of the community. So there's a number of different creative initiatives that Nebraska communities are doing. We worked in one smaller town over in Iowa, about the size of Scribner, maybe a little bit smaller, about 700 people, that they implemented a free lot program. All the infrastructure and everything was installed, the streets were there and everything, and they gave them the ultimatum that if you build a house on this lot within a 3-month period, that lot would then be free to the purchaser. They've built 22 homes in 14 years. The 14-year existence of that program, they've built 22 homes. And those are generally in the price range, maybe a little bit higher than that 100,000 that was mentioned earlier for kind of what the hot zone for prices is in Scribner. But that's a way that they were able to put housing in the ground and get people to move into the community or move into a better living situation. I always tell communities it just comes down to how creative you get with the dollars that you have. And the programs that Greater Fremont Development Council has, they're tremendous opportunities for communities across Dodge County. And Scribner would be remiss if they didn't take advantage of some of that. But there's a lot of different creative projects out there, and some of those we'll highlight as maybe some case studies in the final study too. But yeah, I would strongly encourage looking at some of those different creative methods to making land available and to getting housing construction to be more aggressive with that in the community.
Yeah, Keith, I think it's interesting. I think if that program that you mentioned, I know we talked about that in Cedar Bluffs as well, and I really think if you can create something like that, even if it's albeit $40 or dollars that we collaboratively create as a region, I think if you can create something where we're giving access to gainfully employed people who are living in the community, want to move up the level of housing, or simply want to build a home, if we have access to lots like that, that would be amazing to be able to create a program, call it Scribner free land. I don't care what you call it, but it wouldn't be anything different from the history of Nebraska, right? I mean, we remember how people were given land a while ago. And so I know it sounds cringeworthy when you say free, but if you think of the fact that they're going to build a home, they're going to pay taxes, they're going to have a job here, and you think of the impact, the dollars that flow through that, I think it's worth looking at. And it's almost like Keith mentioned with tax increment finance. And as a community this size, you are able to tip the entire community. Is that right? Or is, I'm not sure if that, are you guys, is it, say it?
50%.
Is it 50% for communities of this size?
Yeah. For a second class city, it is 50%.
I always forget which one that is. I know Cedar Bluff's like the whole city, but now you can use that for not just housing, but you could use that for a combination of development projects. In Fremont, we've done tax increment financing only for commercial projects, unless there's some stipulation. But for a community of your size, as Keith said, if you're more creative, that means you're also adding maybe a commercial project tied to that. You're doing a commercial and residential together, nothing major, but maybe big enough to where you use the tax increment finance piece to build some revenue. And now you're drawing business for the banks, for the school, et cetera. It's an awesome opportunity to start to engage in a more creative process. And we're willing to be here to help. So.
What has the community's experience with TIF been? Has TIF been used for any projects in the community or anything housing related? Is TIF available at
Yeah,
all?
For our commercial, but not on the housing, and it has not yet.
Sure. And that might be one of the avenues you take a look at too, is how do you utilize TIF dollars for housing rehab or for public infrastructure installation for a new subdivision per se. So for some of the ideas that I threw out earlier, are there any of those that kind of piqued your interest a little bit, or which ones do you think would be the most viable to implement in the community?
I'd say probably the free lot, if we can get that developed, where you get an in and hopefully we can get builders building and go from there. It's something we can do. I know we'll expect, our city is committed to probably running infrastructure to a lot of places at almost no cost, just to build up our housing, our valuation, and for our utility money. I can't say that 100%, but I can tell you that's the basic thought of the council right now.
And anybody else in that room, what do you think about that opportunity?
Well, free always sounds great.
You're not wrong.
Well, no, it seems to me there needs to be some sort of incentive, until just within the last 3-4 months, basically right when COVID hit, Elmer named off a lot of lots that have possibilities, but a lot of them need some heavy infrastructure brought to them. And then, of course, that takes time. So, just until basically when COVID hit, that's when 5 lots kind of came available. That's when some infrastructure got put in. So basically, the way I look at things, there's 5 lots. There is one other lot next to another house that was just built. I understand the city put some money into these lots to make them available. I think it was almost $100 grand to make these lots available. So I understand where they come from. I mean, I want to protect the town as well, but it might be tough to give them lots away when they've already got $90,000 into them.
Do you think it might be worthwhile to just create a database of those lots that you mentioned? Because you mentioned quite a few.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, we're in there. We'll be going into the lowest system and everything else, but it's probably working with that. And the other would be if we can get the lots, the 60-foot lots opened up at that price. If we can work some kind of deal out that where it would be the fastest, because all the infrastructure is there 100%.
I do think that TIF is something that you guys should explore, simply because as a community of your size, I think you'd have a lot more leverage to do larger developments as opposed to a one-off properties where you're just doing one house at a time. You could still do one house at a time and you leverage the TIF money so that you're having free lots, but also the revenue and tax base, you can return that money and use it for something else as a developer as opposed to having to pay it right away. So I would look at both of those options.
So I guess this might be a question for Elmer, maybe an attorney, and Martin. Basically all these lots that are available within the town right now are they're owned by an entity. The city themselves don't own them.
Right.
So does the city somehow need to take possession of them? I don't know where that's where there could be some, well, the city can't give it away because another entity actually owns them. And probably has them as collateral, I would imagine.
I mean, I think they'd be open to at least talking with them and see what we can, and see if maybe with the land bank or something else, or we can come back in and come around the other side and get them bought and put in some type of circulation or whatever, and see what can be done. Like I said, I know right now, like I said, all we've been looking to do is put infrastructure in so that the opportunity is there. I think if we ever hit another round of flooding, that you won't need to worry, that everybody sees what a levee can do that's properly maintained. So I think that we'll be okay on that part, but it's an uphill battle, even with all the employers in a 20-mile radius.
One thing that the study is going to incorporate, Keith, and you can expand on it too, is the future land use map. And so yesterday during the North Bend conversation, Tim Keelan mentioned, if you have a planning commission and you have a plat map, you've mentioned a lot of land that could be a potential for building residential units. What will that look like in the next 5 years, just based on Scribner's future thoughts on residential. So he encouraged North Bend to put that together. So is this lot going to be multifamily? Is this lot going to be elderly housing? Is this single family? So that's something, to think about, that you could send to Keith and to Tim, to say, this is what we would like to see for our community in terms of housing. So Keith, I don't know if you want to talk about the land use map at all, or?
Right. With the comprehensive plan for your community, we will take a look at kind of what your existing and your future land uses are to target growth areas for your community as it relates to housing development. Also, target areas for housing rehab, possible demolition and replacement. That it gives a good roadmap for the community to understand kind of where the target areas are for each of those housing activities. It's very important that your future land use map and ultimately your comprehensive plan are kept up to date and are reviewed consistently with any local housing studies that are available. So, Kelly brings up a good point that, it's important that the future land use maps and your comp plan be looked at, to target those development areas, and then also the housing study, what the recommendations are in that, so that everything is kind of working as one piece of the other. But that we will take a look at some of those development areas and some of the future land uses that your comprehensive plan has identified. Is your comprehensive plan pretty up to date? When was that completed?
I'm gonna say we're almost ready for a new one. I'm gonna say it's almost approaching that 4 to 5 years old. So we're ready for to at least update it on our
Mhm.
comp plan.
Because I'm pretty sure too, with respect to the 2019 flooding that's happened, that's probably changed quite a bit of the available land or the developed land, or for housing loss or structural loss in your community. It might be beneficial to consider an update to your comp plan, so that it does work consistently with the new and updated housing study that we're putting together. Just a thought for you folks looking down the road here. One of the other things I wanted to go back to real quick in regards to housing development, or this free lot program folks were kind of interested in. You could potentially look at it as though you're either developing single family housing, or you might even look at it as an elderly housing opportunity to get some of those elderly populations that are living in the 4-bedroom or 5-bedroom house to move into something that offers maintenance-free living, be it lawn care, snow removal, or anything like that. We've seen a lot of communities develop townhouses, kind of a townhouse or a duplex development project. I'd say for Scribner, maybe 8 to 10 units would be sufficient. But it's a good way to not only get your senior populations from within your community and from the rural area to live in your community, but it also frees up that larger housing unit for that family of 4 or 5 or even 6 to be able to reside in your community. So you're kind of meeting a whole bunch of needs by doing something like that. And I'm still kind of researching sort of what your community has as it relates to senior housing or elderly housing, but I didn't know what you folks thought about, some kind of development like that, being able to, satisfy a need of opening up the larger housing units and getting the elderly populations into something that's a little more maintenance free.
Oh, sorry, Martin, you can go.
Well, I was just going to say that regarding the elderly population, we ran into that issue on another committee. And the thing that kept coming up was the elderly population is being encouraged to stay in their house longer. And there's nurses come to their house so that they can stay in their house longer. So in that committee, that's what we ran into. On elderly, you won't get them to move. Most people's intention is to stay in their house, and the healthcare system is working towards that. So then
Right.
when they do move, it's to
Because their house is paid for.
the house.
They don't have,
And if they're gonna move
probably homestead exempted, so they're not paying taxes. So
Yeah.
all they got is a utility bill.
and their house will bring 100,000, and they'll move into a $180,000 one that you built, and they're not gonna do that.
They're not gonna spend the
Yeah.
$700 a month for rent, or
Yeah.
$1,200 a month for rent,
Right.
or payment,
And
And they can stay in their house.
when they
That's
can
the
stay in their
issue.
house for free.
Well, and the healthcare system allows them to do that. They don't have to go to our assisted living. We had assisted living, beautiful assisted living, and we couldn't keep it full.
I went to a lawyer earlier this week with an elderly person who wanted to sell their home. And if they sell their home, Medicare is going to take a chunk of it. So I think we're also seeing where they can't move.
That's an interesting point.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's kind of a rare case to see that happen, but it does happen where, you have to prove that you have to live, or that you can live on your own in a different situation, or you have to prove that, if you're moving to an assisted living facility, that, you can maintain it on your own. And the problem is that just becomes an even bigger cost burden to the senior populations. But kind of what my thought was, for the populations that are living in those 2-story houses, or some of those much bigger houses where accessibility, becomes a challenge. I think eventually they're going to need to look at some sort of a different situation, down the road. And obviously, the independent population or the senior population wants to remain as independent as possible for as long as possible. So yeah, I do understand the whole, staying in your house as long as you can thing. But I think if you have that choice available, that for that particular elderly person or elderly household, that when the time comes that they need to find a different situation, they're doing it in Scribner and not doing it in Fremont or not doing it in West Point, was kind of some of the thoughts that I had behind that program. But that there are points too of assisted living housing and how free and how available that is, or what the challenges have been to fill that up as well.
I do have a quick question. Since I've had this job for about 6 months now, I've had quite a few people my age, millennial age, who are, I would say, lower middle class. And they too, like I did, I have no relation to this town other than finding it on Zillow, and my husband commutes. So what has happened with a bunch of us millennials is we buy a house because we see HGTV, all these fixer-upper shows, and you're like, oh, it's just cosmetic. And I've had so many young couples come to me and ask, what are their options for trying to fix up their home or try to winterize their home? And every time I look into a program, it all has to be like, you have to be destitute. Like, you have to be a single mother of 10 living in a basement before anybody even looks at you. And is there any other options out there? I mean, because if we as millennials could fix up these homes, if we ever move on, then we're like slowly fixing up the community. We're leaving behind a nicer home than when we got there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another good point too. There's a lot of the younger generations, myself being a millennial too, that they see HGTV and, oh, I can do this to my house, I can do that to my house, and it won't cost me as much as I think it will. But the interesting thing is there was another show that talked about, home renovations, but it was people doing it themselves, and it showed the entire process of these homeowners that are doing their own renovations, or they're purchasing a house and doing renovations on their own. But it was going behind the scenes as to how much work it really is. And I don't think that show's on anymore, but housing rehab is a big deal. It's definitely a need for each community, but it's also a massive undertaking, especially if you're inexperienced. So, do I think housing rehab is needed in the community? Yes, I do. And it comes down to having proper knowledge of how to do that.
Do you know of any programs that we could point them into? We have quite a few millennials in this town for it being a small town, I think.
Well, I'm not a millennial, but my house was built in 1901 and it needs some serious work.
Keith,
Right.
I think the housing stock question is probably tied to that, right? It's the housing stock. I don't know what the average house age of a home here in Scribner is, but I'd imagine there's a lot like that. And so when she asked about a program, the first thing I thought was we could easily push to create or move dollars that way to create one, or leverage larger state programs that would give us some assistance. But those aren't as easy to come by. So I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and owner-occupied rehab is way more common than renter-occupied rehab because you don't have a lot of dollars available on the state level or even so much the local level for a renter property. It's just a matter of there's someone else that has to take care of the property. Speaking on behalf of renters, and once you fix it up, once it looks good and it's up to code, you got a family that comes in there and might tear it all apart, and then you're right back to square one. And a lot of renters or a lot of landlords are kind of like, well, what's the point of me trying to fix this up? It's gonna take more of a local effort for renter occupied rehab to happen. I think just because of what I just talked about, but owner occupied rehab, that's something I know Gary has talked about. Gary has all the dollars in the world for, I think. But there's statewide programs too, also through your development district, through Northeast Economic Development District, that they have owner-occupied rehabilitation programs as well. And it is a competitive process, I do believe, but that's there are dollars available to do those kinds of activities.
Yeah, I feel like some of those programs, you have to look at all of the regulations and red tape that end up eliminating most of the people that you think that you wanted to target in the first place. And so I think it's probably always beneficial to try to create a small pot of money locally, as Keith said, to have some more leverage and flexibility. So maybe if a renter wants to enter into the rehab piece, then it's obviously going to have to be a collaboration with the owner of that building, and the stipulation as to how that money, is it grant only, is it a grant / loan, or how does that work? I think locally you could start to build that. And while we have a little bit of money that Kelly and I could probably look at to jumpstart a program, we probably still need more buy-in to have something that's even worthwhile. On average, Keith, what would you say a rehab might be, those average projects that you see?
It kind of depends on the extent of rehab that's needed. If you're looking at moderate rehab, which would be, kind of more cosmetic improvements like new paint, new doors, new windows, and things of that nature, that could run anywhere 24 all the way up to, I would say, 32,000 potentially. If you start looking at more structural components or more substantial rehabilitation, you're going to be in upwards of probably 36 up to $44,000. That just kind of throwing some numbers right off the top of my head. But that's where we see a lot of communities. That's about how much money they put into owner-occupied rehab activities. And we'll make recommendations on kind of how many housing units are needed for moderate rehab or substantial rehab. That's, we kind of took a look at that at the 2017 study too, and the 2020 study will have a little bit about that for Scribner as well. But it just kind of depends on not only what kind of rehabilitation activities need to be taking place, but also, can you acquire the property to do that? Or is it going to be a property owner that's going to do it on their own? It's all about acquisition. Does the community want to be a sponsor of that activity, or do they want to just encourage local homeowners to take it upon themselves to, do that rehab project, and then the community just provide some sort of financial assistance or assistance of some kind, or maybe Gary's organization does that too. But those are just, some of the thoughts that I had regarding, moderate to substantial rehabilitation of owner-occupied housing. So it is 8 o'clock though. I know we said we had about an hour session, so I don't want to keep you too much longer, but any final questions or comments that you might have, I'd be more than happy to answer them at this time. All right. Sounds like I answered everybody's questions. We're all good to go, right? Feel free to shoot me an email or anything. I can provide you my email address if you'd like. I guess outside of that, that pretty much ends our meeting. So if there aren't any final questions or comments on anything.
Yes, what is your email?
Yes, I was waiting for that. I was going to see if there's any interest to that. Shoot me an email with any of your questions. It's kcarl, that's KCARL, at Hannah Keelan, that's HANNA KEE, 2 E's, LAN.com. And we'd be more than happy to work with your community a little bit further on this deal as well, and some other points of interest that you'd like us to highlight in the final study.
Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Keith.
All right. Appreciate all of your time tonight. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
You too.
Yeah.
Just like the show. Wow.
Lights on.